Dr. Emrys Voss had a talent for ignoring nonsense, but today SELENE9 was a veritable symphony of chaos. The lunar colony, or crater of competitive insanity, as he lovingly referred to it, was crumbling faster than a cookie under a toddler's fist. This morning, Voss discovered that ignoring nonsense was no longer an option. The control center was currently experiencing what the tech team described as a minor hiccup, which, in Voss's experience, usually meant some catastrophic failure. As he maneuvered through the densely packed corridors dotted with fuming colonists, the air crackled with tension and a healthy dose of sweat. "Hey, Voss!" a voice called out, cutting through the murmur of discontent. It was Dr. Livia Kane, his unwilling partner in crime. "You look like hell, which is an improvement," she said with a smirk. "Kane," Voss replied, raising an unimpressed eyebrow. "And here I thought your bedside manner couldn't get any worse." She snorted, falling in step beside him as they headed towards the source of the latest emergency. "So, what's the crisis du jour? Are we drowning in moon dust again?" "Nope. Worse," Voss answered, deadpan. "We've got a mystery signal messing with our life support systems and, possibly, our heads. And by heads, I mean everyone suddenly decided that paranoia is this season's hottest trend." "Fabulous," Kane replied. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned mass hysteria to start the day." They reached the control room, a hub of flickering screens and blinking lights that screamed dysfunction. The tech team was flailing around like headless chickens, which, in Voss's opinion, was a generous analogy for their usual level of competence. "All right, team," Voss announced, clapping his hands. "Who wants to explain why we're about to suffocate without sounding like a conspiracy theorist?" A young technician, whose name Voss could never remember and barely cared to, raised a hand. "We've been picking up a weird signal, coming from beneath the surface," he said, sounding like he was about to wet himself. "It's screwing with the bio-controls." Kane crossed her arms, her skepticism palpable. "A signal? You mean like alien jazz, or more of a, please die slowly, sort of thing?" The technician shifted uncomfortably. More like it's alive. It's interacting with our systems, almost like it knows what it's doing." "Great," Voss muttered, "an intelligent signal with a taste for sabotage. Just when I was getting bored of regular old hardware malfunctions." Kane glanced at Voss, the corners of her lips twitching in a half-smile. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader?" "Simple," Voss said, with all the bravado of a man who had no plan whatsoever. "We find this signal's source before it turns us into gibbering lunatics." "Oh, good," Kane replied. "For a second, I thought this was going to be difficult." As they delved deeper into the labyrinth of corridors, Voss couldn't help but notice the growing tension among the colonists. Eyes darting like paranoid rabbits, whispers turning into loud accusations, it was a scene straight out of a cheap thriller. "You think this signal of yours is causing all this hysteria?" Kane asked, sidestepping a shouting match between two engineers. Voss shrugged. "Either that, or everyone's finally lost their collective minds. Frankly, I'm not sure which scenario is more terrifying." They reached the sub-levels, a maze of pipes and humming machinery that Voss hoped would lead them to answers. Here, the air was cooler, the lighting dimmer, and for a brief moment, he almost felt like they might find something close to sanity. "Almost. All right. According to our tech genius back there," Voss said, consulting a handheld scanner, "the signal seems strongest around this area." "Well, that's convenient," Kane said, eyeing the rusted hatch in front of them. Nothing like a mysterious hatch in a creepy sub-level to get the blood pumping. Voss smirked. "Ladies first?" Kane rolled her eyes, but didn't hesitate to yank the hatch open. The stench that hit them was overwhelming, a mixture of rot and something distinctly chemical. "Jesus," Voss muttered, pressing a sleeve to his nose. "What died in here? Hopefully not the last shreds of my sanity," Kane replied, stepping inside. The room beyond was a tangled mess of cables and half-functioning technology, the kind of place that screamed bioengineered disaster waiting to happen. "Well," Voss said, surveying the chaos. "This looks promising." Kane snorted, "Promising like a punch to the face." As they picked their way through the debris, Voss's scanner started beeping frantically. "Bingo," he said, pointing to a console nestled against the far wall. "You think that's our signal source?" Kane asked, raising an eyebrow. "Only one way to find out," Voss replied, already tapping away at the console. The screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code that made no sense whatsoever. It was a language Voss had never seen, a jumble of symbols and patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Well, Kane said, peering over his shoulder. That's unsettling. Understatement of the century, Voss muttered. This isn't just a signal. It's alive. Kane's expression shifted, a mixture of intrigue and dread. Alive how? Voss shook his head. No idea, but it's connected to the colony's systems, and it's doing a damn good job of screwing with us. So, we're dealing with a rogue AI? Kane asked. I wish, Voss replied, rubbing his temples. This feels more like a bioengineered entity. Something with a mind of its own. Fantastic, Kane said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because dealing with regular old tech failures was getting too boring, right? Voss flashed her a tired grin. Precisely. Now, let's figure out how to shut this thing down before it decides to turn us into its next science experiment. As they worked, the lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows across the room. The tension was palpable, an electric charge that made Voss's skin prickle. You ever get the feeling we're in way over our heads? Kane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Constantly, Voss replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. But that's half the fun, isn't it? Kane chuckled softly, though there was no real humor in it. Yeah, fun, like juggling knives while blindfolded. Just as Voss was about to make a breakthrough, or cause a spectacular failure, the console beeped aggressively, the screen flashing a warning in that ominous indecipherable script. Voss, Kane said, her tone suddenly sharp with urgency. I think you might have pissed it off. Lovely, Voss muttered, frantically tapping keys in a bid to regain control. Nothing like a homicidal signal to spice up the evening. The room shuddered, a low rumble reverberating through the walls. Voss exchanged a grim look with Kane. Brace yourself. I think things are about to get a lot more interesting. The lights flickered again, plunging them into near darkness, and in that moment, Voss realized just how much trouble they were in. Trouble with a capital T, and a side of catastrophic consequences. Kane's voice cut through the gloom, tinged with a mix of fear and bravado. Well, Voss, at least we won't die of boredom. Voss chuckled despite himself, the sound echoing hollowly in the oppressive silence. No, we'll just die from whatever the hell this thing has in store for us. As the console sputtered back to life, the ominous script replaced by a map of SELENE9, a realization hit Voss like a freight train. Kane, he said slowly, eyes locked on the screen. This thing. It's got control of the entire colony. Oh, joy, Kane replied, voice dripping with sarcasm even as her eyes widened with genuine horror. And here I thought things couldn't get any worse. Voss nodded, his mind racing. We need to shut it down, fast. Before it decides it likes playing with us a little too much. Kane stepped closer, her gaze unyielding. Then let's give it a game it won't forget. With that, they plunged into the heart of the enigma that threatened their very existence, driven by equal parts desperation and determination. As the shadows of SELENE9 closed in around them, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental, and terrifyingly irreversible. The corridors of SELENE9 were no place for the faint of heart, or the sane, for that matter. Dr. Emrys Voss had long since learned that lesson, usually the hard way. As he and Dr. Livia Kane trudged through the dimly lit maze of the colony's underbelly, his thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Voss, what the hell are we supposed to do if we find this thing? Kane asked, with the kind of faux innocence that bordered on confrontational. Why, Kane, Voss replied with a sardonic grin, I thought you loved poking dangerous things with sticks. Only when they're not trying to poke back, she shot back, glancing around like she expected the walls to sprout tentacles at any moment. Don't worry, Voss said, checking his scanner. Worst case, we'll just make it someone else's problem. Kane snorted, the sound echoing off the metal walls. You mean like we do with everything around here? Exactly, Voss replied, deadpan. Delegation is a skill. As they approached the next junction, a shadow detached itself from the wall. Voss, already on edge, nearly jumped out of his skin before recognizing the figure. Era Kale, he greeted, lowering his raised scanner. Lunar miner extraordinaire and unexpected ally. Kale offered a lopsided grin, her eyes sharp and calculating. Unexpected, yes. Ally? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Kane arched an eyebrow. We heard you might know a bit about what's lurking down here. Depends, Kale said, shrugging. Heard you two were looking to poke something with a stick. Voss chuckled. Seems to be the theme of the day. Got any insights? Eerie whispers, unsettling signals, Kale said, ticking them off on her fingers. And a general sense of impending doom. Kane sighed. Just what I needed. Another reminder of how not boring today is. Kale glanced between them, her expression serious. Whatever it is, it's old and angry. You don't disturb something like that and walk away unscathed. Voss nodded, his mind working overtime. Then let's tread carefully. I don't fancy being the next cautionary tale. The trio continued deeper into the bowels of SELENE9, a place where the lights struggled to pierce the gloom and every corner promised a new nightmare. Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but he chalked it up to a healthy dose of paranoia. What about this hive mind? Kane asked, her voice a low murmur. What's it want from us? Besides the usual, crush, kill, destroy. Kale shrugged. Control, probably. It's what they all want, right? Besides, who wouldn't want to micromanage this pile of dysfunction? Voss smirked. Imagine the Yelp reviews. As they reached a yawning chasm that cut through the subterranean level, Voss felt a chill run down his spine. The air seemed thicker here, almost alive with anticipation. This where your whispers come from? He asked, peering into the darkness. Yeah, Kale said, her voice barely above a whisper. Trust me, you don't want to go down there. Well, Kane said, we didn't come all this way just to run back with our tails between our legs. Voss sighed. We did, actually, but here we are. Kale crossed her arms, her gaze unyielding. If you go, you better have a plan. And maybe a backup plan for when the first one goes to hell. Plan A. Survive, Voss said. Plan B. Make it someone else's problem. Great plans, Kane said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What could possibly go wrong? With a sense of impending doom hanging over them, they descended into the chasm. The walls seemed to close in, and Voss tried not to think about the millions of tons of lunar rock overhead. Ever wonder why we do this? Kane asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. All the time, Voss replied. But then I remember that I could be back at the colony dealing with the usual idiots. At least they don't try to kill us, Kane pointed out. Voss chuckled darkly. Give them time. As they reached the bottom, the darkness felt almost solid, a living thing that pressed in on all sides. Voss's scanner was going haywire, the readings fluctuating wildly. Looks like we found the epicenter, Kale said, her voice hushed. This is it. The chamber opened up before them, an enormous cavern that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. In its center stood a structure that defied logic, a twisting mass of alien designs and organic growth, as if someone had decided that a Borg cube and a coral reef should have a love child. Wow, Kane said, her voice a mix of awe and horror. That's something. Yeah, Voss agreed. Something that's definitely not supposed to be here. Feels like it's watching us, Kale murmured, eyes darting around the chamber. Good, Voss said. I hate being ignored. The structure seemed to hum with a life of its own, a low thrumming that resonated in Voss's bones. He stepped closer, his curiosity fighting with his survival instincts. So, any ideas on how to shut down an alien hive mind? Kane asked, her tone light but with an undercurrent of tension. Not a clue, Voss admitted. But I've always been a fan of turning things off and on again. Kale snorted. Yeah, good luck finding the power button on that thing. Hey, you never know, Voss said, approaching a panel that seemed more organic than mechanical. Might be a big, red button labeled, "Do not press." As he reached out to touch it, the structure seemed to react, shifting subtly under his hand. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and Voss could swear he heard whispers in the back of his mind. Voss? Kane said, taking a step back. I think you might be pissing it off. Join the club, Voss muttered, trying to focus on the panel. The whispers grew louder, and Voss felt a connection forming, a link between him and the alien entity. Images flashed through his mind. Fragments of memories that weren't his, a tapestry of alien thoughts and emotions. Whoa, he said, stumbling back. That's not fun. Care to elaborate? Kale asked, her tone half mocking, half concerned. Voss shook his head, trying to clear the fog. It's broken. Fractured. Trying to communicate, but everything's jumbled. Kane's eyes narrowed. Can we use that? Voss thought for a moment, the pieces clicking into place. If we can disrupt the signal, maybe we can break its hold on the colony. Right, Kane said, clapping her hands. Let's poke it until it falls apart. Voss grinned. That's the spirit. Tension thrummed in the air as they set to work, each of them focused on a different part of the alien structure. The whispers grew louder, insistent, but Voss pushed them aside, determined to see this through. You ever get the feeling we're just poking a bear with a stick? Kale asked, her voice barely audible over the hum. All the time, Voss replied. But sometimes the bear deserves it. It was a delicate dance, trying to disrupt the alien signal without triggering some catastrophic defense mechanism. But Voss had always been a gambler, and he wasn't about to fold now. Got it, Kane said, her voice triumphant. Signals weakening. Good, Voss said, wiping sweat from his brow. Let's hope it stays that way. The structure shuddered, the glow dimming as the alien presence retreated. Voss felt the connection snap, and for a moment he was weightless, adrift in a sea of unfamiliar sensations. Voss? Kane's voice cut through the haze, grounding him. You okay? He nodded, his mind slowly clearing. Yeah, just. Give me a sec. Kale gave him a once-over, her expression unreadable. You look like you just saw the universe. Maybe I did, Voss said, chuckling despite himself. And let me tell you, it's not all it's cracked up to be. As the chamber settled into an uneasy silence, Voss knew they had only bought themselves time. The alien presence might be diminished, but it wasn't gone. And somewhere beneath Selene 9, it was licking its wounds and plotting its next move. Guess we'll just have to keep poking, Kane said, her tone resigned but determined. Voss nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Who knew pissing off aliens would become a hobby? With Kale in tow, they turned to leave the chamber, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. But they weren't about to back down, not when there was still a fight to be had. We'll be ready, Voss said, his voice steady. Whatever it throws at us next. As they made their way back to the surface, Voss couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie. They were all in this mess together, after all, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to see them through. And if not, well, at least they'd go down swinging. The air inside the control center was thick with tension, like a bad joke waiting to be told, and Dr. Emrys Voss was in no mood for punchlines. He wiped a trickle of sweat from his brow, trying to ignore the flashing red alert that seemed more insistent than a toddler demanding attention. The hive mind's interference with Selene 9's systems was getting worse, and the plague it unleashed was spreading like a really committed rumor. Dr. Livia Kane leaned over a terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys with the reckless abandon of someone who had long since given up on sanity. Any bright ideas on how to stop this thing before we all start foaming at the mouth? She asked, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. Why, yes, Voss replied, sarcasm dripping like oil from a rusty pipe. Let's just ask it nicely to stop ruining our lives. Kane snorted, glancing at the mess of wires and blinking lights. We're probably better off resorting to interpretive dance at this point. Era Kale, the lunar miner with a penchant for being unhelpfully honest, watched the exchange with the kind of amused detachment reserved for spectators of a particularly messy bar fight. You two done flirting? Because I'd really like to know if we're going to explode or just slowly lose our minds. Why not both? Kane shot back, a smirk playing on her lips. Voss huffed, refocusing on the screen. The hive mind was an angry, confused beast, and its fracturing thoughts were seeping into the colonists' heads, amplifying paranoia to dangerous levels. It was a bit like living in a conspiracy theorist's fever dream, and Voss was tired of waking up in it every day. We need to find a way to communicate with it, Voss said, more to himself than anyone else. Maybe we can reason with whatever's left of its brain. Yeah, because reasoning with a psycho-hive mind has worked so well in the past, Kale observed, unimpressed. Kane squinted at the screen, where a schematic of the colony flickered uncertainly. What's that line they always use in horror trids? It's trying to understand us. Or eat us, Voss added grimly. Hard to tell these days. A sudden surge in the lights made them flicker ominously, and for a moment, the room was plunged into darkness before returning to its usual, soul-crushing dimness. Voss felt a chill creep up his spine, not unlike the sensation of someone walking over his grave, if graves were a luxury he could afford. Okay. Now it's just showing off, Kane said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. Kale sighed, tapping a boot on the floor. Either way, we need to contain this. People are starting to act, well, more insane than usual. Voss nodded. The plague wasn't just a physical threat, it was seeping into their minds, turning fear and suspicion into a weapon. If they didn't act fast, SELENE9 would implode under the weight of its own madness. We need to access the hive mind's core, he said, not liking the sound of his own plan. See if there's any way to stabilize the damn thing. Great, Kane replied, her enthusiasm about as genuine as synthetic meat. A nice stroll into the heart of lunacy. Just what I signed up for. Think of it as a cosmic safari, Voss said, with the added bonus that everything wants to kill you. Kale smirked. So just like every other day, then? The trio moved with purpose through the shadowy corridors of SELENE9, their footsteps echoing like accusations in the tense silence. The whispering of the hive mind was a constant undercurrent, a discordant symphony that nobody had signed up to hear. So, what's the plan? Kale asked, breaking the oppressive silence. Assuming we don't just run screaming from our own shadows. First, we find the core, Voss said, clutching his scanner like a talisman against the madness. Then, we try not to die. Solid plan, Kane deadpanned. I feel safer already. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in, like the insides of a beast slowly digesting them. Voss couldn't help but think that maybe metaphorical beasts were overrated. As they rounded a corner, a group of colonists staggered into view, eyes wide and movements jerky, like marionettes with tangled strings. Their babble was a mix of paranoia and despair, a tapestry of human misery. Great, Kane said under her breath. The welcoming committee. Voss approached cautiously, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. We're here to help, he called out, hoping his voice didn't betray the tremor he felt in his bones. The leader of the group, a wiry man with a beard that would make a hermit proud, fixed him with a wild-eyed stare. Help? He spat, words dripping with distrust. You're with them, aren't you? The voices. Voss shook his head, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. No, we're just trying to fix the problem. You know, the thing that's making you all extra special today. How do we know you're not lying? Another colonist demanded, clutching a wrench like it was the only thing standing between her and oblivion. You don't, Kale said, her voice a calm counterpoint to their hysteria. But right now, you've got two choices. Follow us or continue playing hide and seek with your sanity. The colonists hesitated, their collective anxiety almost palpable. Finally, the bearded man nodded, his paranoia momentarily overshadowed by desperation. All right, but if this is a trick. It's not, Voss assured, though he wasn't feeling overly certain himself. Just stick with us. With the colonists in tow, they continued down the corridor, the air thick with tension and the occasional muttered conspiracy theory. Voss wondered idly if he'd ever be able to look at tinfoil hats the same way again. The hive mind's core was closer than it had any right to be, an amalgam of alien technology and organic growth that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Voss couldn't help but think of it as a particularly malevolent heart, pumping madness into the colony's veins. Well, that's disgustingly impressive, Kane said, peering at the structure with a mix of awe and revulsion. How do we shut it up? Carefully, Voss replied, the understatement of the century. He stepped closer, his scanner buzzing like an angry insect. The hive mind's fracturing thoughts were a cacophony in his head, and he gritted his teeth against the onslaught. It was like trying to eavesdrop on a billion simultaneous conversations, each one more deranged than the last. Think you can stabilize it? Kale asked, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Voss nodded, though he suspected his confidence was as thin as the atmosphere on Mars. I'll give it my best shot. As he worked, the whispers grew louder, the hive mind's confusion and rage bleeding into his consciousness. He could feel its bewilderment, its inability to comprehend the concept of individuality. Humans, with their myriad thoughts and emotions, were an enigma, and the hive mind had no idea how to process them. Talk to it, Kane suggested, her voice cutting through the noise. See if it'll listen. Voss hesitated, unsure of what to say to a fractured alien consciousness. Hello? He ventured, feeling more than a little ridiculous. I'm Voss. Come in peace? The whispers shifted, a ripple of curiosity mixed with something darker. Voss could sense the hive mind reaching out, trying to make sense of the human anomaly in its midst. Look, Voss continued, trying to sound more confident than he felt. All we want is for you to stop driving us insane. Maybe we can help each other out? The response was a jumble of thoughts and feelings, a torrent of alien emotion that threatened to pull him under. But beneath the chaos, he sensed a flicker of understanding, a tentative bridge between their minds. That's right, Kane said, as if encouraging a particularly temperamental child. Work with us, not against us. The hive mind shuddered, the core pulsing erratically as it struggled to comprehend the foreign concept of cooperation. Voss felt a sliver of hope, though he knew better than to count his lucky stars just yet. It's working, Kale said, her tone incredulous. I think it's actually listening. Voss nodded, clinging to the fragile connection. Good, now let's see if we can keep it from tearing us apart. The process was slow and agonizing, like trying to defuse a bomb with a blindfold on. But gradually, the whispers began to quiet, the hive mind's fractured thoughts coalescing into something almost coherent. How's it going in there? Kane asked, glancing at Voss with concern. He shook his head, sweat trickling down his back. I'm not sure. It's like trying to talk sense into a particularly stubborn rock. Sounds about right, Kale said, her smile edged with tension. As the minutes ticked by, the connection grew stronger, the hive mind's chaotic energy settling into a tentative calm. Voss could feel its curiosity, its desire to understand the strange creatures that defied categorization. There we go, he said, relief flooding through him. I think we've got it. The core pulsed gently, the alien presence no longer a threat but a wary ally. Voss exhaled, his exhaustion mingling with a sense of accomplishment. Well, that was suitably terrifying, Kane said, slumping against the wall. Let's never do it again. Agreed, Voss said, though he knew the battle wasn't over. The hive mind might be stable, but Selene 9's problems were far from solved. Kale eyed the colonists, who were watching the proceedings with a mix of awe and suspicion. What about them? You think they'll be okay? Voss shrugged, too tired to lie. Maybe, but it'll take time. Time we might not have, Kane pointed out, her expression grim. Voss nodded, knowing she was right. The hive mind might be a temporary ally, but it was still unpredictable, its actions driven by a logic that was anything but human. Guess we'll just have to keep poking the bear, Kale said, her tone resigned. That, or learn to live with it, Voss replied, though he wasn't sure which prospect was more terrifying. As they made their way back through the colony, Voss couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with the hive mind. It was an unlikely partnership, born of necessity and a shared need for survival. But in the grim darkness of SELENE 9, even the unlikeliest of alliances might just be enough to see them through. And if not, well, at least they'd go down swinging. Dr. Emrys Voss wiped sweat from his brow, the taste of victory soured by the nagging knowledge that things were bound to get worse before they got better. If they ever got better. SELENE 9 was a ticking time bomb, and the hive mind was the unstable fuse, flickering with chaotic sparks of human and alien consciousness. Just when you think it can't get weirder, Kale said, her voice echoing through the narrow corridors like a reluctant confession. The hive mind takes a crack at stand-up comedy. I think I heard my own thoughts in there. Which is just unsettling. Dr. Livia Kane snorted, a cynical smirk pulling at her lips. Yeah, I caught a few glimpses of my existential dread. Really wish it'd stick to its own madness instead of borrowing ours. Voss nodded, not quite sure how to process the fact that an alien entity was cribbing notes from their mental breakdowns. Assimilation. It's trying to understand us. And failing miserably, like a drunk trying to navigate a calculus book, Kale added, the corners of her mouth twitching. Except this one's got a penchant for turning functional adults into gibbering wrecks. They turned another corner, the corridor's dim lighting casting long shadows that seemed to linger just a little too long. The walls around them hummed, a faint vibration that suggested the colony was not entirely stable. Not that it ever was. As if on cue, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before sputtering back to life. Ah, ambiance, Kane said dryly. Really captures the whole haunted space dungeon vibe. Voss held up his scanner again, its screen flickering like it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to be helpful or not. The hive mind's messing with the systems. It's like it's trying to read our minds through the wiring. Great. Let's hope it doesn't find the emergency flush button, Kale muttered, glancing at the ceiling as if expecting it to start raining sewage. They pressed on, the tension around them crackling like static electricity. The colonists trailing behind didn't help, their paranoia a heavy, oppressive force that made the air feel thin and sharp. Voss tried not to think about the fact that they were essentially leading a group of paranoid, plague-ridden hostages through a labyrinthine death trap. The risk of them snapping was high, not to mention their knack for dramatic interludes of hysteria. The hive mind was another story, a wild card with a penchant for unpredictability. It was learning, if you could call its attempts to assimilate human thought, learning. What's the plan when we get back? Kane asked as if already dreading the answer. Try to get the systems under control. Keep the colonists from rioting. You know, the usual, Voss replied, not mentioning the unsettling flicker of the hive mind's presence in his own thoughts. The air grew thicker, charged with an energy that made the skin crawl. It wasn't just the hive mind trying to make sense of them, now, it was trying to become them. Voss could almost feel the alien entity testing the boundaries of his mind, like a curious child poking at a fragile toy. The lights flickered again, this time accompanied by a groaning sound that resonated through Selene 9's structure. Kale stopped, looking around as if half expecting the walls to close in. You ever get the feeling we're about to become part of the ventilation system? She quipped, trying for humor but landing closer to grim resignation. The systems weren't just failing. They were reacting, the hive mind's influence seeping into every circuit and wire, turning SELENE 9 into its own personal playground. The lights were a warning, a sign that the colony's infrastructure was as unstable as the minds within it. Voss, Kane said, her voice pitched low, we need to do something before this place decides it's had enough of us. Voss nodded, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread curling around his spine. We've got to stabilize the systems before they go completely haywire. No pressure, Kale said, her tone as dry as the Martian desert. Just the lives of everyone on the colony hanging in the balance. Moving quickly, they reached the control center, the tension in the air so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Voss set to work, fingers flying across the console as he tried to wrest control from the hive mind's insistent grip. Got anything in there that doesn't involve doom and gloom? Kane asked, peering over his shoulder. Depends on your definition of doom, Voss replied, the console's screen a blur of data and warnings. And gloom. Kale glanced at the exit, as if expecting a horde of enraged colonists to burst through any minute. Think we've got time before they start eating each other? Not if I can help it, Voss said, adjusting a setting that sent a low hum through the room. Right now, we're just trying to keep the lights on. Kane leaned against the wall, arms crossed, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. And here I thought dystopian space adventures would be glamorous. The console beeped angrily, as if it too was fed up with the situation. Voss frowned, tapping at the controls with increasing frustration. The hive mind's built itself a nice little nest in the system. It's going to take some convincing to get it out. Can we convince it with a crowbar? Kale asked, half serious. Or maybe a sternly worded letter. Voss snorted, despite himself. If only it were that simple. Right now, I'm just hoping it doesn't decide to turn the air off. Well, that'd solve the problem of keeping the colonists in line, Kane replied with a grim chuckle. The console beeped again, and Voss felt a surge of relief as some of the systems flickered back to life, the oppressive hum dimming to a dull throb. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. Okay, Voss said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We've got a little more time. Kale straightened, eyeing the console with something resembling hope. And the hive mind? Still trying to figure us out, Voss replied. But at least it's not actively trying to kill us. For now, small victories, Kane said, rubbing her temples. What about the plague? Voss hesitated, the word a bitter reminder of how little control they actually had. We'll need to focus on containing it. Maybe we can bargain with the hive mind, get it to back off long enough to find a solution. Or it could just decide we're too much trouble and go find another bunch of idiots to bother, Kale suggested, eyes narrowing. Not that I'm holding my breath. Yeah, well, considering the air situation, that's probably a good idea, Kane added, her tone sardonic. Voss glanced at the door, where the colonists loitered in an uneasy huddle, their eyes darting like cornered animals. We've got to keep them from panicking. Last thing we need is a stampede. Remind me why we're the ones stuck with this mess? Kale asked, not really expecting an answer. Voss shrugged, his exhaustion a constant companion. Because nobody else was dumb enough to volunteer. Kane chuckled, though there was no real humor in it. Guess that makes us the brightest minds in the room. They worked in silence, the hive mind's presence hovering over them like a shadow. It was a delicate balance, trying to stabilize the systems without provoking the alien consciousness that had made itself at home. The air was filled with the hum of machinery, the occasional flicker of a screen casting ghostly light across their faces. Voss could feel the hive mind's curiosity, its interest in these strange, contradictory creatures who defied logic and reason. Think it's learning anything useful? Kane asked, glancing at Voss. Depends on what you consider useful, he replied, fingers moving over the console. I think it's fascinated by our ability to screw things up. Well, we are experts, Kale said with a sardonic smile. The minutes ticked by, each one a battle to keep the hive mind's influence at bay. Voss felt the weight of his task like a physical presence, the knowledge that one slip could send everything spiraling into chaos. Finally, the console's lights steadied, a sign that the worst of the interference had been beaten back. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was something. Voss leaned back, rubbing his eyes. All right, we've got a little breathing room. Emphasis on little, Kane said, nodding toward the door. We should check on them. The colonists were still there, still jittery, their paranoia a barely contained force. Voss approached them carefully, aware that any sudden move could send them over the edge. Systems are stable, he said, keeping his voice calm. For now, we're working on a longer-term solution. The bearded man from earlier eyed him with suspicion, arms crossed over his chest. And the voices? Quieter, Voss replied, not entirely truthfully. But we'll need your cooperation if we're going to fix this. The colonists exchanged glances, their fear a living thing. Finally, someone muttered, what choice do we have? Exactly, Kale said, stepping up beside Voss. So let's try not to make this any harder than it has to be. With the colonists reluctantly in tow, they began the trek back through the colony, the shadows still long and the air still charged with that unsettling energy. So what now? Kane asked, glancing at Voss as they walked. Voss considered the question, the answer a murky tangle of possibilities. We keep the system stable. Try to find a way to communicate with the hive mind. And hope it doesn't decide we're more trouble than we're worth. Sounds like a plan, Kale said, her tone wry. A terrible plan, but a plan. They moved through the corridors with purpose, though the path ahead was anything but clear. The hive mind was an enigma, its motives and desires as alien as the depths of the cosmos. But one thing was certain. They were in this together, humans and hive mind alike, bound by a shared need to survive in a universe that seemed determined to grind them into dust. And if that meant forging an uneasy alliance with an unpredictable alien consciousness, so be it. In the grim darkness of SELENE9, even the most unlikely of allies might just be enough to see them through. Or not. But then again, nobody ever said survival was easy. The control center felt like the eye of a rapidly worsening storm, the kind with a name like Hurricane Screw-Up. Voss could almost see the chaos brewing outside, the colonists' minds unspooling under the hive mind's influence. He hoped they were all too busy arguing over the last tin of synthetic beans to notice the lights dimming again. Feels like we're living in a haunted house, Kane muttered, rubbing her arms as if she could brush off the tension clinging to the air. A haunted house with bad plumbing and an alien squatter, Voss corrected, glancing at the console as if it might decide to explode just for fun. He half expected it to start spewing ectoplasm or whatever the digital equivalent was. Kale leaned back in her chair, her booted feet propped up on a nearby console. So, are we on the brink of collapse schedule, or have we already crossed that line? Voss sighed, tapping at the screen. I'm pretty sure we're on the express train to things fall apart. Next stop, chaos. The lights flickered again, just in case they were getting too comfortable. Voss could almost hear the hive mind chuckling in the back of his head, like it had found the button labeled dysfunction, and decided to press it repeatedly. Any chance we can convince the hive mind to take up knitting instead of colony destruction? Kane asked, only half joking. Yeah, maybe it just needs a hobby, Kale said with a smirk. Or maybe it's just trying to knit us all a collective noose. Dark, even for you, Voss said, giving her a sideways glance. But you're not wrong. The console spat out another error message, a delightful reminder that Selene 9's systems were as stable as a drunk on a unicycle. Voss slapped the console, not that it helped anything, except maybe his mood. Great, now it's mad, Kane observed, sarcasm dripping from her voice. Story of my life, Voss replied, scrolling through a sea of blinking red warnings. Everything's a little bit angry and a whole lot broken. The air felt heavy, not just with failure but with the unspoken fear that it was only going to get worse. The hive mind was like a toddler with a new toy. It didn't understand it, but it sure liked banging it against things to see what would happen. We need to get to the source, Voss said, more to himself than the others. Before it decides to play peekaboo with the life support systems. As if on cue, the lights dimmed further, leaving them in a half-lit limbo that was eerily fitting. It made the shadows seem alive, and if Voss squinted, he could almost see them moving. We might have bigger problems, Kale said, nodding at the door where the colonists had been gathering like disgruntled storm clouds. Angrier than usual? Voss asked. Let's just say they're one failed light away from a full-scale revolution, Kale replied, her tone light but her eyes serious. And I don't think they're interested in any Meet the Hive Mind workshops. Voss felt the weight of it settling in his gut. The colony was teetering, and it was only a matter of time before someone pushed it over the edge. He glanced at Kane and Kale, their faces grimly determined despite everything. Looks like we're the lucky ones, Voss said. Front row seats to the collapse of civilization. Just another Tuesday. Kane snorted. Too bad we left the popcorn on Earth. They moved quickly, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. They were the ones who hadn't run, who hadn't given up, though it was tempting to just call it a day and let the hive mind have its way. But then, tempting and practical were rarely on speaking terms. The corridor was darker than it should have been, the emergency lights casting everything in a sickly glow. It felt like walking through a nightmare, except this one didn't have the decency to end when you woke up. Why do I feel like we're starring in a bad sci-fi flick? Kale asked, her voice echoing off the walls. Because the script's terrible, the director's asleep, and the special effects are a joke, Voss replied, sidestepping a fallen panel. They reached the main control room, where the system's heartbeat was weakest, and the hive mind's presence was most palpable. Voss could feel it brushing against his consciousness, a cool, invasive touch that left him cold. Here we go, he murmured, steeling himself. Time to see just how much of a pest this thing can really be. Kale gave a low whistle. Looks like it's already redecorated. The place was a mess, wires pulled out like intestines, screens flickering like dying stars. The hive mind had been busy, its fingerprints, or whatever the alien equivalent was, all over the place. Think it's trying to send us a message? Kane asked, surveying the chaos. Probably just redecorating, Voss said. You know how aliens love a good open-plan design. He stepped forward, hands outstretched as if he could feel the hive mind's pulse through the circuitry. It was there, a thrumming presence that was both familiar and utterly alien. It was trying to connect, to understand, but its methods were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. Okay. You overgrown Wi-Fi signal, Voss muttered under his breath. Let's see if we can't have a little chat. He began the process of interfacing with the console, fingers moving with a speed born of desperation. The hive mind pushed back, curious but cautious, like a cat trying to decide if it wanted to be petted or bite your hand off. You sure about this? Kane asked, watching him work. What if it decides to invite itself in? We'll cross that bridge when it eats us, Voss replied, grimacing as he fought for control. Right now, it's like wrestling with a particularly stubborn ghost. There was a moment of stillness, a breath held between worlds, and then, contact. Voss felt it, a connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The hive mind was there, a presence that was neither malevolent nor benevolent. Just curious, just confused. Hello? Voss thought, casting the word out into the void. There was no answer in words, just a cascade of impressions, images, feelings, snippets of memory. The hive mind was trying to understand, to piece together the puzzle of human existence, but its comprehension was fractured at best. Okay, Big guy, Voss murmured, trying to keep his thoughts clear. Let's see if we can't make a deal here. The images shifted, a kaleidoscope of humanity's worst traits: paranoia, fear, anger. It was mirroring what it saw, what it felt within the colony. It didn't understand the why, just the what. Not exactly showcasing our best qualities, Kale observed, peering over Voss's shoulder at the data stream. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly a fan of its people skills either, Voss replied, trying to project calm. But it's a start. The hive mind shifted again, the connection deepening. Voss felt its curiosity, its confusion, and a flicker of something else, something like hope. Let's not blow it, Kane said, her voice low. We've got one shot at this. Voss nodded, focusing on the connection. We need your help, he thought, trying to convey the urgency. We're not your enemy. The hive mind's response was a flood of sensations: understanding, hesitation, a question that echoed in the void. Why? Because if we go down, you're coming with us, Voss replied, aware of the irony. We're stuck together, like it or not. The atmosphere shifted, the air tingling with potential. The hive mind was listening, and for the first time, Voss felt a glimmer of understanding. Not perfect, not complete, but there. Now or never, Kale said, glancing at the dimming lights. Voss took a deep breath, pushing his thoughts into the connection. Help us stabilize the systems. Let us fix this. There was a pause, a silence that stretched into eternity, and then, the hum of the colony's systems, a gentle throb as the hive mind withdrew its influence just enough to let them work. Voss exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders. Okay, we've got a chance. Kale and Kane exchanged a glance, relief tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. One hell of a first date, Kale quipped, eyeing the systems as they flickered back to life. Think it'll call us tomorrow? If we're lucky, it won't, Voss said, a tired grin tugging at his lips. But for now, we've got time. They worked quickly, the hive mind a silent partner in their endeavors. It was a fragile alliance, built on necessity and the shared threat of oblivion. But in the grim darkness of SELENE9, it was enough. For now, as they labored, Voss felt the hive mind's presence recede, leaving behind a quiet understanding. It was learning, yes, but more importantly, it was willing to learn. Humans and alien consciousness, two sides of the same battered coin, struggling to coexist in a universe that had no time for either. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through the dark. Dr. Emrys Voss stared at the console as the hive mind's influence receded, leaving an eerie quietness that was more unnerving than any chaos. It felt like a bar fight that had paused for a smoke break. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Right, so we've managed to stop the kid from smashing all the toys for now. You think it'll last? Kane asked, leaning against the wall like she had no interest in leaving. Which was good, because leaving wasn't an option. Not unless they fancied a leisurely stroll through the vacuum of space. Does anything? Voss replied, nudging a fallen cable out of his path. The trick is to keep the plates spinning long enough to realize you never liked plates anyway. Kale was tapping a rhythm on the console, her fingers a blur. So what's the grand plan, fearless leader? Or are we just winging it and hoping the universe has a sense of humor? If we're counting on that, we're in worse shape than I thought, Voss said. But I've got an idea. A dangerous one, but hey, so's getting out of bed in the morning. Kane raised an eyebrow. Please tell me it doesn't involve more direct interfacing with the hive mind. I don't need another headache in my brain that isn't mine. Not exactly, Voss hedged. We need to teach it something. Show it what makes us tick, so it stops trying to flatten us into whatever it thinks a nice, orderly consciousness should be. Kale laughed, a dry sound that barely touched her eyes. You want to give it a crash course in being human? Good luck. I've been trying to figure that out myself for years. Right, Voss said, but maybe we can show it enough to get it to back off a bit. Stop it from trying to turn us into a happy, brainless collective. Happy? You think that thing's aiming for happy? Kane snorted. More like efficient. And my version of efficiency involves a lot more caffeine and a lot less existential dread. They gathered around the console, a mock council of war made up of two cynical scientists and a miner who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. But she was here, and that counted for something. What's your risky plan this time? Kale asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Gonna sing it a lullaby? Show it cat videos? Close, Voss said, typing furiously. We're going to upload a curated selection of human experiences. Kane blinked. Curated? Like a playlist? What, you're going to introduce it to the classics and hope it gets bored halfway through The Godfather? Something like that, Voss said. We need it to see us not as a single entity to be assimilated, but as a collection of diverse, contradictory individuals. If it understands that, maybe it'll stop trying to jam us all into the same mold. Kale gave a low whistle. Ambitious. Reckless. I'm in. Of course you are, Kane said dryly. You're all in for anything that could go up in flames. Just my style, Kale replied, grinning. But seriously, I like the idea. It's like introducing a toddler to broccoli. Might not like it at first, but it learns to appreciate it eventually. Voss started compiling a selection of data, images, videos, snippets of art, literature, music. The highlights of humanity in all its messy glory. We need to show it the value of diversity. Show it why we're better as individuals. Kane shook her head. Never thought I'd be trying to sell the concept of individuality to an alien hive mind. But here we are. Desperate times, Voss said, hitting the final command to upload the data. And we've got to work fast. I'm pretty sure SELENE9 won't wait for us to figure it out. As the data began to transfer, the lights flickered again, a reminder that the colony had about as much stability as a politician's promise. The hive mind was still there, looming at the edges of their consciousness, but its touch was less invasive now. More like a curious child peeking over their shoulders. Any chance this works and we end up on some interstellar most wanted list for corrupting alien youth? Kale asked, watching the upload. Because that would be a story. If it does work, we'll have more to worry about than alien parents complaining, Voss replied. Like explaining to our own people why we didn't just blow it up. Blowing things up is always plan B, Kane said, but I'd rather avoid the paperwork if plan A has a snowball's chance. They watched as the data streamed through, a digital lifeline thrown into the void. The hive mind's presence thrummed around them, a silent audience to humanity's greatest hits. Think it's working? Kane asked, half hopeful, half resigned. Let's hope it's got good taste, Voss replied, eyes fixed on the console. If not, we can always try interpretive dance. The hive mind's influence shifted, a subtle change in the air. It was listening, absorbing, considering. Voss could feel it, a delicate thread of connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Maybe it just needed a little culture, Kale said, adjusting her stance as if readying for a fight that might yet come. Though I'm not sure how culture translates to aliens. Probably about as well as our jokes, Voss said. But if it buys us time, I'll take it. As the last of the data uploaded, the lights flickered once more, then stabilized. Voss felt a cautious optimism brewing, a rare commodity on SELENE9. All right, here's hoping this introduction to humanity isn't its bedtime story, he said, stepping back from the console. Because if it snores, we're out of luck. The silence stretched, the air charged with an anticipatory tension. The hive mind's presence was there, hovering, its curiosity palpable. It was no longer the oppressive force it had been. Instead, it felt more like a question waiting to be answered. Feels like waiting for a jury to come back, Kane muttered. Only this time, the jury's alien, and we're the ones on trial. Welcome to the future, Kale said, where you're only a bad decision away from being absorbed by a hive mind. But hey, Voss added, at least we can say we did something. Even if it doesn't work, even if this thing decides it doesn't like what it sees, we tried. Reassuring, Kane said, folding her arms. But next time, let's try not to piss off the Space Collective. As they waited, the colony's system slowly regained life, a hesitant heartbeat that matched their own. The hive mind was there, always there, but its presence was less a weight and more a shadow, a reminder of the fragile détente they had achieved. So, Kale said, leaning back against the console, what's next? We just hang out and hope it doesn't decide we're more trouble than we're worth? For now, Voss said, we keep an eye on things, try to fix what's broken, and hope the hive mind learns to appreciate the messy chaos of humanity. And if it doesn't? Kane asked, eyes dark with the question that lingered unspoken. Then we go to plan B, Voss replied, the smile not quite reaching his eyes. And hope we're better at improvising than it is at assimilation. The console beeped softly, a reminder that the world had not ended, not yet. They had bought themselves time and, maybe, a chance to show the hive mind the value of being human. For now, it was enough. In the grimdark expanse of space, where nothing was certain and everything was fleeting, it was enough. And in the quiet aftermath, as the hive mind's presence settled into a tentative acceptance, Voss couldn't help but wonder if they had done the impossible. If, somehow, they had reached across the gulf of understanding and made a connection that would hold. But that was a problem for tomorrow. For now, they had survived another day, and in the endless night of SELENE9, that was its own small victory. So, Kale said, stretching with the ease of someone who had faced down the abyss and found it lacking, "What's for dinner?" "Anything but calamity," Voss replied, finally allowing himself to relax. "I think we've had enough of that for one day." And with that, they turned away from the console, the remnants of a fragile alliance echoing in the silence, a testament to the resilience of humanity's will to survive. Dr. Emrys Voss had never been a fan of cliffhangers, especially when the cliff was a fragile space colony and the hangars were a hive mind with a curiosity problem. Yet here they were, their fates precariously balanced on whether an alien consciousness found their cultural mixtape more compelling than assimilation. "Well, we've done it," Voss said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of forced nonchalance that didn't fool anyone, least of all himself. "We've given the galaxy's most inquisitive toddler a box of crayons. Let's hope it colors between the lines and doesn't decide to eat them," Kale said, her fingers still drumming a pattern on the console. "Or us, for that matter." Kane crossed her arms, eyes fixated on the screen as if sheer willpower could make the outcome any less uncertain. "Any signs of it backing off?" she asked, voice edged with the kind of skepticism born from a lifetime of disappointment. "Nothing definitive," Voss admitted, scanning the data readouts. "But the lights haven't flickered in the last 5 minutes, and I haven't fantasized about strangling anyone recently, so that's progress." "High bar," Kane muttered, rolling her eyes. "If this works, we'll be the toast of the colony. Assuming there's any colony left to toast. Or a colony that wants to toast us instead of roasting us on a spit for bringing this mess to their doorstep," Kale added, a wry smile tugging at her lips. The console beeped, interrupting their gallows humor with an urgency that suggested the universe wasn't done with them yet. Voss leaned forward, peering at the readouts. The hive mind's presence was less oppressive, more like a gentle hum in the back of his mind. It was listening, absorbing, and, for the first time, learning. "Looks like it's taking the bait," Voss said, trying to keep the hope from his voice. "The systems are stabilizing." Kane let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Guess it likes what it sees. Or it's just taking a break before round 2. "Probably both," Kale said, stretching her arms above her head. "But for now, I'll take a break that's less ominous silence and more hopeful pause." The control center, once a cacophony of alarms and stressed voices, had settled into a tense quiet. The kind of quiet that could mean salvation or the calm before the storm. "How's our plague situation?" Kale asked, glancing at the status reports. "Last I checked, half the colony was convinced they were being mildly poisoned." "Mildly?" Kane snorted. "Try violently. But it's improving. The hive mind influence seems to have been amplifying the paranoia." "So our alien friend is a hypochondriac too," Kale said, shaking her head. "Who knew?" Voss leaned back, arms crossed. "I'll take hypochondria over genocide any day. Looks like the plague's subsiding now that the mind's backing off." "Good," Kane said, nodding. "One less thing to worry about when we're already juggling chainsaws." "And here I thought you liked living on the edge," Voss said, grinning despite the situation. "Living, yes. Dying from alien-induced insanity, not so much," Kane replied, her voice dry as the lunar dust outside. The hive mind's presence continued to shift, its touch more of a curiosity than a compulsion. A tentative exploration rather than a hostile takeover. "Think it's starting to appreciate us?" Kale asked, half joking, half serious. "Appreciate? That might be pushing it," Voss said. "But it's not actively trying to turn us into drones, so that's a start." Kane chuckled, a sound that held more relief than amusement. "If it's looking for role models, I hope it doesn't pick any of us." "We're a charming bunch," Kale said, her tone light. "Who wouldn't want to be a part of this dysfunctional family?" "Anyone with sense," Voss replied, shaking his head. "But maybe that's why it finds us interesting. We're a riddle wrapped in chaos inside an enigma." So, what now? Kane asked, the question hanging in the air like a dare. We just wait and see if it decides to play nice? Voss shrugged, his smile tight. We keep doing what we've always done, survive. Make sure the systems stay up, the colony stays intact, and hope the hive mind keeps its curiosity friendly. And if it doesn't? Kale asked, her eyes meeting Voss's with the kind of intensity that only came from staring into the abyss together. Plan B, remember? Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of the unspoken. We're nothing if not adaptable. The console emitted a soft chime, drawing their attention back to the data stream. The hive mind was processing the human experience, its influence shifting like a river changing course. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it was different, less aggressive, more inquisitive. It's starting to understand, Voss said, almost to himself. Or at least it's trying to. Let's hope it doesn't see us as a bad sitcom, Kane said. Or worse, a reality show. Kale laughed softly, the sound a brief respite from the tension. Maybe it'll find us endearing. Like those shows about humans doing stupid things. Voss shook his head. Endearing or not, we've got a chance. It's learning the value of diversity, of individuality. If we can keep showing it that, maybe we can coexist. Coexistence, Kane echoed, the word tinged with disbelief. In this place? Wouldn't that be something? It's the future, Voss replied, his gaze fixed on the screen as if it held all the answers. And right now, it's the best shot we've got. The hive mind continued its quiet contemplation, the digital lifeline still tethered to the console like a fragile bridge between worlds. Voss could feel its presence, a constant reminder of the delicate balance they'd achieved. Guess we're teachers now, Kale said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Educating the galaxy, one awkward cultural exchange at a time. Not the career path I imagined, Kane said, rolling her eyes. But it beats the alternative. Voss nodded, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. We've bought ourselves time, a chance to show it what being human really means. And maybe, just maybe, it'll decide we're worth keeping around, Kale said, a note of hope threading through her words. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken bonds that had formed under pressure. They'd faced the unknown and come out the other side, changed but unbroken. So, Kane said, breaking the quiet with her usual bluntness. What's our next move? Keep rebuilding, Voss said, the words carrying a determination that felt almost foreign. Fix what's broken, learn from what's not, and move forward. One crisis at a time. Kale leaned back, her expression a mixture of relief and resolve. Sounds like a plan. Here's to hoping we don't end up as the galaxy's cautionary tale. And if we do? Voss asked, a wry smile tugging at his lips. At least it'll be one hell of a story, Kale replied, her grin matching his. The console's soft glow illuminated their faces, the quiet hum of the systems a comforting backdrop to their thoughts. The hive mind's presence lingered, a silent partner in their uncertain future. Let's make sure it's a story worth telling, Voss said, the words a promise to himself and the colony that had become their home. The control center, once a battleground of fear and desperation, felt different now. Not safe, not by any stretch, but a place where hope had carved out a small, stubborn niche. And if it all goes to hell? Kane asked, the question more rhetorical than anything. Then we'll adapt, Voss said, his voice steady. We'll find a way. We always do. The hive mind, a constant presence at the edge of their awareness, seemed to echo that sentiment. It wasn't an ally, not yet, but it wasn't the enemy it had been. It was something new, something undefined, and in that uncertainty lay a strange kind of potential. Here's to surviving another day, Kale said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to their improbable victory. And to whatever comes next, Kane added, her smile weary but genuine. Voss nodded, the weight of their journey resting comfortably against the promise of what could be. They had faced the darkness and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. In the vast, unyielding night of space, that was enough. For now, as they turned away from the console, leaving the hive mind to its newfound education, they carried with them the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they had done the impossible. And in that hope lay the seeds of a future where humanity and alien could coexist, bound together by the shared chaos of existence. For now, it was enough. Voss stared at the console, the dim glow illuminating his face like a ghost story told around a campfire. Except this wasn't a campfire, and the ghosts were very much real. Well, it's official, he said, tapping the screen. The hive minds decided we're not worth annihilating. Yet, Kale leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the data. So we're like that weird neighbor it tolerates because we occasionally mow its lawn? Exactly, Voss replied, smirking. We're the neighbors with the suspiciously well-kept lawn and a penchant for loud music. Great, Kale said, stretching her arms. So we're stuck in this cosmic sitcom where the alien next door is learning not to melt our faces off. What's next? A bake sale to raise funds for alien understanding? Could be worse, Voss said, shrugging. We could be stuck in a horror flick where everyone dies horribly. Kane wandered in, her expression a blend of skepticism and chronic disbelief. I heard something about a bake sale. We're not seriously considering selling cookies to an alien consciousness, are we? Voss chuckled, shaking his head. No, just contemplating our new role as the galaxy's least qualified ambassadors. Ambassadors, Kane echoed, her voice dripping with dry humor. Here's hoping we don't have to go to any intergalactic luncheons. I'm not sure I could stomach alien appetizers. Or worse, alien small talk, Kale added, grimacing. Imagine trying to explain sarcasm to something that barely gets the concept of individuality. Voss leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. Well, we've got our work cut out for us. The hive mind's not exactly the most understanding roommate, but it's learning. Kane sighed, staring at the flickering lights. Learning what, exactly? That humanity's a bunch of misfits who can barely keep a space colony running. Hey, we're not just any misfits, Kale said, a crooked grin on her face. We're misfits with style, and plenty of issues, Voss added. But it's a start. The hive mind is easing off. Systems are stabilizing, and the paranoia's down to a dull roar. Kane snorted, rolling her eyes. Dull roar. That's one way to put it. People are still convinced the air's trying to strangle them. Yeah, but now they're just mildly irritated instead of homicidally paranoid, Voss replied. Progress, right? Progress, Kane repeated, shaking her head. Well, at least we're not dead. That's something. Kale walked over to the window, peering out at the barren lunar landscape. You think the hive mind will ever really get us? Like, understand why we yammer on about weather and complain about our space backaches? Voss joined her, staring out into the vast nothingness. Maybe not entirely, but if we can keep it curious without it deciding we're better off extinct, I'll consider it a win. Yeah, Kale said, her voice softer now. Curiosity's not the worst thing. Better than hostility, or indifference, Voss added. Those are the real killers. Kane wandered over, staring alongside them. So what's next? We just keep teaching it the wonders of human mediocrity? Pretty much, Voss replied. We show it the value in our flaws, our quirks. Like our tendency to make terrible jokes when we're stressed? Kale said, smirking. Exactly, Voss said, nodding. We're a mystery, and maybe that's what keeps it from vaporizing us out of sheer frustration. A silence settled over them, the kind that spoke louder than words. It was the silence of survivors, of people who had faced the abyss and found a way to look back with a smile. So, Kane said finally, breaking the quiet. We're gonna keep on surviving, right? One day at a time. Voss nodded, his gaze still fixed on the moon's surface. One day at a time. And who knows, maybe one day we'll even get a thank you card from our alien friend. Kale chuckled, the sound like a bomb against the tension. Yeah, right, and maybe pigs will fly in 0G. Voss turned away from the window, the holographic console still casting its pale light. Okay, back to work. We've got to make sure this place doesn't fall apart while our new pal's learning about 90s sitcoms. Right, Kane said, rolling her eyes but smiling. Because nothing says humanity like slapstick and laugh tracks. They returned to their tasks, a strange sense of routine settling in. The hive mind's presence was still there, a curious observer rather than a looming threat. It was a start, a fragile bridge between two vastly different worlds. As the hours passed, the control center hummed with a quiet determination. Systems were checked, reports were filed, and somewhere in the background, the hive mind continued its exploration of human culture. Hey, Voss, Kale called from across the room, holding up a device. What do you think about rigging this to play some music? See if the hive digs our tunes. Voss raised an eyebrow, considering. You think it'd like music? Or would it just find it annoying? Only one way to find out, Kale said, grinning. Besides, if it doesn't like it, we can always claim it was experimental art. Experimental art, Kane echoed, snorting. Yeah, that'll fly. We'll be the avant-garde ambassadors of humanity. Voss chuckled, nodding. Why not? Let's see if we can give the hive mind a taste of some classic Earth jams. Couldn't hurt. They spent the next hour rigging the console, a mix of wires, screens, and no small amount of creative swearing. Eventually, Kale hit play, and the tinny strains of an old rock anthem filled the room. Think it'll like it? Kale asked, her tone hopeful. Voss shrugged. Only one way to find out. If the lights start flickering, I'll take it as a sign it's not a fan of guitars. Kane listened, head tilted as if trying to detect a change in the air. Well, at least it's not screaming in rage. That's a plus. Yeah, Voss said, smiling. Maybe it's tapping a metaphorical foot. They continued working, the music an unexpected backdrop to the steady rhythm of their tasks. It was a small thing, but it felt important, like offering a hand in friendship, even if that hand had a tendency to fumble. Hours turned into days, and to everyone's surprise, the colony began to thrive. The systems, once on the brink of collapse, held steady. The air was breathable, the lights stayed on, and the life support stopped trying to choke them in their sleep. The hive mind, it seemed, was learning. Slowly, it was starting to understand that humans were more than just a collection of cells to be influenced and controlled. They were complex, contradictory, and occasionally infuriating, but they were also fascinating. How are things looking? Kane asked one morning, sipping a cup of what passed for coffee in the colony. Pretty good, Voss replied, scanning the readouts. No major issues, no rampant paranoia. And the hive's playing nice. Playing nice, Kale repeated, leaning back in her chair. Who'd have thought? Maybe we should send it a thank you card. Or a mixtape, Voss said, grinning. Seems to like our music well enough. Well, we'll keep doing what we're doing, Kane said, setting her mug down. As long as the colony stays standing and our alien buddy doesn't decide to pull the plug, we're golden. The way I see it, Voss said, gesturing at the console, we've got a shot at something amazing here. If we can keep this up, who knows? Maybe we can teach it about more than just rock songs and bad jokes. Kale nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, maybe we can show it what it really means to be human. The days blended into a rhythm, the colony's heartbeat steady and strong. Communication with the hive mind was still tenuous, but it was there. A connection that, while fragile, held the promise of something more. Think it'll ever fully understand us? Kane asked one evening, her voice low. Voss considered her question, the weight of it settling like lunar dust. Maybe not completely, but that's okay. Understanding isn't everything. Sometimes, just trying is enough. They stood together, watching the stars twinkle with a nonchalance only celestial bodies could manage. It was a universe full of unknowns, but here, on this lonely moon, they'd forged something resembling peace. A peace built on the shared chaos of existence, on bad jokes and strange music, on the relentless hope that maybe, just maybe, they were worth keeping around. And in the end, that was enough. For now, as the lights dimmed and the music played on, the future stretched before them, a canvas waiting to be filled. Together, they faced the stars with something dangerously akin to optimism. Here's to surviving another day, Voss said, raising his imaginary glass once more. And to whatever comes next, Kane replied, her smile a beacon in the dim light. Kale joined them, her laughter ringing out across the control center. And if it all goes to hell? Then we'll adapt, Voss said, his voice steady. We'll find a way. We always do. The hive mind, ever present, seemed to echo their sentiment. It wasn't an ally, not yet, but it wasn't the enemy it had been. It was something new, something undefined, and in that uncertainty lay a strange kind of potential. For now, it was enough.